Well, welcome to you all for another virtual discussion of IAFA on a very, very disturbing situation of Afghanistan. One doesn't know what's going on there. I was just watching TV. It says Hamid Karzai and Abdullah have been put under house arrest. I don't know whether it's true or not. Every television channel in the evening, 5 o'clock, you have half a dozen experts who are giving their opinion. I had chosen my few friends whom I think they are better experts than what you see on there. Padmanoya sir, good evening.
Good evening. Hi.
And I welcome you all. I will not really, having so many experts here, I will not like to take time and giving my views what's going to happen in there. I better you have come here to listen to them. My only view is that what is happening in Afghanistan will not affect only Afghanistan, it will affect the entire region in the world, the whole war on terrorism. And what will new questions coming? You have China, you have Russia, Iranians, everybody has own agenda. And we don't, where do we stand? We have been having the discussions as we have written to you all that each one of you will have 10 minutes, nobody interrupts you. And you kindly keep a track of your own time because I have nobody to give a cue. So we will begin with somebody whom you are seeing here. He's the only person with such a long beard on the whole sort of meeting here. Is my old friend Shakti Sinha ji, who, as you know, all started with administrative service, and then I know him more as a PS to the former Prime Minister Vajpayee. When I was Ambassador in Libya, I sent him a poem when he went to Lahore called Paigam in Lahore. Later I regretted to have written that poem. Anyway, he has been director of the Nehru Memorial Museum Library, where I did quite a few functions with him, including a lecture by former President Pranab Mukherjee. And now he's a director of the Atal Bihari Vajpayee Institute of Policy Research and International Study. And he was, for the information of many others who do not know, he was director of the Governance and Development Team at the UN Assistance Mission of Afghanistan long back. Shakti ji, a lot has changed since you were there. Now, I'm going to throw at you quite a few questions. You jumble them, you answer in whichever way you want, or you answer whichever you think. Now, we are fortunate that we have evacuated most of Indians. We saw very evocative images of PNG Minister Hardeep Puri carrying Sri Guru Granth Sahib over his head. Some Afghan MPs, senators have also been brought in. While the US and EU allies might evacuate most of the nationals, thousands of Afghan nationals who work for US and EU countries will be left behind at the mercy of Taliban, who haven't changed much, notwithstanding their claim to the contrary. How do you see the emerging human tragedy there? The second question is, since you were there, we have spent $3 billion and completed so many public utility projects, including the Parliament, the Salma Dam. India finds herself in a situation where it can't possibly influence the unfolding development of Afghanistan. What is the future of India's projects in Afghanistan? And third question is, your dear friend Swapan Das Gupta wrote in one of his op-ed recently, in the emerging great game, India starts with a weak hand. Some cynics will say India doesn't have any hand at all. Over to you, Shakti ji. Please unmute your... Okay.
Thank you very much. I'm also setting my alarm for 10 minutes.
Okay.
Allotted to me. So I will also forget. Thank you very, very much for this very timely thing. Yes, we see a lot of things on TV. But yes, in any case, as you started by saying, Karzai had to vacate the house he was living in, Dr. Abdullah, and the movements were restricted in any case. So they were in some kind of de facto house arrest for quite some time. So I'm not surprised if that has become more rigorous now. I'll start with your third question actually. And the other point that you sent us in your email. One, of course, is that in this emerging great game that people see happening, is India all by itself? Now, obviously, in Afghanistan, different countries have had different interests. Americans had one specific interest, the British had another. Then you have Russia, China, Iran, Turkey, Qatar, etc. all of them have been having different interests, which is why the international community has not been able to firm up its position in the last 20 years to effectively bring about change. Having said that, the reality is that one by one, most of these countries have made up with the Taliban, have facilitated the Taliban legitimization. I'm not for a moment recommending what happened is good, but that is irrelevant. That question, whether Taliban should be legitimized or not, is completely irrelevant at this stage. It is legitimized by everybody, other than us, we think, but everybody else has some sensitivity. Now, the USA and the Taliban have been working very comfortably right now. Since the Doha Agreement, and in fact from before that, Taliban had completely stopped attacking Americans. Even if you look at the casualty figures of Americans from 2014 onwards, it had actually come down to about single digit sum, but otherwise, 15, 20 in a year. So it is not something that the US could not have sustained. And now the evacuation is being done with full Taliban cooperation. Taliban effort, of course, is to allow the foreigners to go away as soon as possible. They want that to happen so the world can move on and forget them. But they want to prevent the Afghans from leaving, which is why their presence is there on the streets, supplemented by the presence of the remnants of the Afghan National Army, who are actually guarding the gates of the airport. That is happening. Now, Russia did a lot for legitimizing the Taliban, China also, organizing peace conferences, not of course peace negotiations, where the Taliban was there, the Afghan leadership was there, political leadership, but the government was prevented from attending, other than individuals in their private capacities. So people think, can we revive the Russia thing? Iran, what happened in the 90s? It's a quite different world now. Russia has been very much an important factor in doing that. It even said the day after the Taliban walked in, Kabul is a better city, quieter, more peaceful city than before. The Chinese, again, have been doing this for the last many years. Many years they've hosted Taliban delegations, and the red carpet to Mullah Baradar in July was a sign of treating them as a sovereign authority, not just a representative, but a sovereign authority. But there are many catches there that we must note. Xi Jinping and Putin have had a conversation on the phone just yesterday, and the readout is from the Kremlin, and I quote from the Hindu today, these two leaders, quote, expressed their readiness to step up efforts to combat threats of terrorism and drug trafficking from the territory of Afghanistan, unquote. Further quote that they want to establish peace and prevent, again, quote, preventing the spread of instability to adjacent regions, which is why Russia has moved troops into Uzbekistan and Tajikistan in a big way. So you can see that while they were legitimizing the Taliban presence a lot, it was not as easy as just doing that. It has had other implications. Similarly with Iran has been very, very quiet. Now, the Iranian embassy is very much there, as is the American in some form. The Russians are there, Turkey is there, etc. But Iran also has become very quiet on the Taliban issue now. So while they were helping it, promoting it in many forms, I think the fact that one funded the Americans would walk out was not factored in by Russia, China, or Iran, definitely. Turkey is a very complex relationship. Turkey offered the first office. The Taliban wanted a post office. This is opened one in Istanbul. It went to Doha ultimately. Turkey and Pakistan are very, very close. And while the Turkish agreed to the American request to post its army to guard the airport after the withdrawal, Taliban has rejected that completely, but has asked for Turkish help to run the civil terminal. So you can see that these are not simple binary relationship happening, good, bad, friend, foe. So India, yes, has a different position. Others have engaged. We have, officially, I'm not aware of an engagement. There may be some, I cannot comment on that. But we have been very, very hesitant to speak about it. We have not, throughout we kept saying that we can't let down our friends in Kabul by talking to the Taliban. I'm not sure whether that was a very good idea, but again, that is just irrelevant at this stage. India definitely would have to now have lots of friends in Afghanistan, lots of friends in the region. And if there is some kind of rethinking in the minds of Iran, you can definitely work with them. But keep in mind at the end of the day that Iran, Russia are all bound by the strategic considerations of the United States. They do not want the USA. They are actively working to reduce the US influence in the world. They want the US to come down. The cost of it may be Afghanistan in short term, but That is something is there. So your ability to really work with them will be limited. Definitely, we have to accept that. Oh, this talking about investments made. Everybody keeps talking about investments made in assets. I don't see them investments in a very narrow sense of financial rate of return. Yes, a broader rate of return is when two countries work together, mutually beneficial. You wanted a stable Afghanistan, not to become a hotbed for militancy, Islamic militancy. Therefore, you were there. Otherwise, there's no reason for you to be there. You were there for that reason. 20 years you have done it. Obviously, that policy has now run into a kind of wall. The assets remain there. The roads, Salma Dam, the Northern Electricity Power System, NEPS, the Jalan Highway, remains with the Afghan people. They're owned by the Afghan people, serving the Afghan people. So that we really should not worry about the safety or something. It's not something I can pick it up and take it away. In any case, it was constructed for the Afghans. It is their assets. That has led to a lot of goodwill in Afghanistan about India. Can that goodwill be sustained or not is a question our policymakers must think very critically about, because that is really very, very important. How does really move ahead with this kind of a thing? Wait and watch, absolutely. At this stage, we have to wait and watch. We should not be seen as too active. The very fact that the Pakistani army brought in the Haqqanis to control Kabul, the thousands of them apparently controlling Kabul, not the regular Taliban. They have brought in Pashtuns from Pakistan, the Dir Gen from Pakistan to run Kandahar as an example. And therefore, anything that you do, while may encourage some people in Afghanistan, is likely to make you a greater target. And therefore, India's position is a very awkward position of not being very influential. Obviously not, you don't share a border. You can't do all kinds of activities that countries do across national borders. You have to be careful with it. But I think we need to really not give up on Afghanistan in the sense that in the larger interest, and especially the demonstration effect, I do not believe that Afghanistan will pose a threat to India. But one, the commitment to the other jihadi groups, as an Islamic group, they can't say no to them for shelter. It allows Pakistan to shift many jihadi group camps technically to Afghanistan for deniability reasons. And third, it can act as a role model or encourage a lot of people, many of them, who want to take action against India in different parts. And therefore, that is the really kind of a threat that we have to watch out for. Not so much that it's a direct threat to us and the Afghan militants now having controlled Afghanistan will start walking over. I don't see that happening at all. Will there be peace in the short term? It's an uneasy peace, but peace is there. We should not make too much of the Panjshir rebellion. As Ahmad Masood said yesterday, he's open to discussions, he also realizes that this is not the 90s, and the kind of background that the Jamaat forces had those days, the so-called Northern Lands, actually called United Front, is not there today. Some arms have been supplied to him, they allege, from Kabul itself. Helicopters have been seen flying from Kabul airport to Panjshir. We don't know the credence of these things because in the time of uncertainty, rumors are very, very strong. But I do not see, again, a lot of people have said India should support the Northern Land. It does not exist. Its leadership is mostly in Pakistan. Some have been allowed. Dostum has been allowed to go across north. Ismail Khan, after being arrested, has been allowed to go away. They want to be just them out. So there is no Northern Alliance in that sense. And we should not be in the business of promoting violence or civil war. I think you can start these configurations. You cannot control them. So I think I would recommend that we go very, very slow on that. Yes, it's very, very difficult times for us. We don't see how things will man out, but that critically now depends, and that's my final point. As I said, this is my final point. This depends on, we can have a government in Afghanistan which represents different groups, or as I suspect, the Taliban would not be happy forming an inclusive government, will definitely like to control. After all, they didn't wait out 20 years. Not that they were fighting. And the Taliban soldiers are not fighting soldiers. They're locals who lived in towns and villages, not in the hills or in Pakistan, so leadership in Pakistan. But they did not do all this just to let others come in the way. So lots of former leaders, Dr. Hadi including, are lining up and happy to serve the new government. I do not see that process coming out very smoothly. Thank you very much. I'll stop. My 10 minutes are over. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Shakti ji. You have thrown so many things in the pool. Let us see. Now I will turn to Suhasini, who is not new to the discussions. She has been part of our discussions in the real science in the hall. Now, Suhasini need no introduction. She began her career with CNN, made herself a household name when she was doing her weekly program World View with Suhasini on CNN IBN for almost 9 years. She has covered conflict zones Sri Lanka, Syria, Lebanon, and even Kashmir Valley. I'm told she was injured there. Though she doesn't resemble Salman Khan, many journalists say she is the Salman Khan, Dabang Salman Khan of journalism in her own writing. You're surprised to know I was just searching on Wikipedia, and they have all kind of information. They were having her hair black, her weight is 60 kilo, her height is 5 feet 4 inches. I don't Wikipedia where to get all this. Now I'm going to Suhasini throw some questions. You have heard Shakti is talking about uneasy peace. You talk about no threat. I think you will have your own view. I have sent some questions earlier. Now you can listen to me, then you can choose what you want to listen. In spite of a stern warning from former President George Bush and former US Allied Commander David Petraeus and some internal intelligence assessment, President Biden announced the plan to leave by 31st August, which many believe triggered off Taliban's lightning takeover of Afghanistan and plunging the country in humanitarian crisis. Hasn't the US let down the Afghan people and friends like India? Second, not being on the same page as the US, Russia, China, Iran, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Turkey. Is India really as isolated as it looks? And third is your dear friend Barkha Dutt wrote in the Hindustan Times how much the Taliban is willing to be puppeteered by Islamabad will determine India's next move in Afghanistan. Do you agree with her? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Surendra Kumar, for including me in this eminent panel, and I look forward to hearing, of course, it's my lucky day. I'm hearing Mr. Shakti Sinha speak for the second time today on Afghanistan. Obviously, it's an issue that is gripping everyone around the world. Regardless of what you think India's stakes are in the issue, right now it is a story that is unfolding before our eyes and people are watching it. Your first question really, has the US let down India and the Afghan people? I would say that there is a process that has gone on for the last 2 years in which the United States has continued with its stated plan, stated objective without changing or modifying its course, regardless of what anyone has said. If 2 years ago, I think it was in 2018 or 2019, President Trump was, just about to invite President Ghani and Taliban leaders to Camp David on, surprisingly, the anniversary of 9/11. He may have stopped for a little while over there, but actually America has not stopped. So what we are seeing is a consistent move towards the situation we are seeing today. Whether it is a situation that sees the US pull out its troops, maybe the pullout from Bagram was not expected, and that's where he has had to override his security officials the most. But the Taliban's push into Kabul, one way or another, is something that was foreseen and possibly even encouraged by the US. After all, it has been the US, Russia, and China that have held these negotiations where consistently we heard President Biden, in fact, President Biden said it himself, and Mr. Blinken, the Secretary of State, telling President Ghani, it is time for you to leave, it is time for you to make way for some kind of an inclusive government, basically that doesn't include you, but does include the Taliban. So essentially, what we are seeing now, a scenario where the Taliban is in a position of power in Kabul, Mr. Ghani is out of it, may not be exactly what the US envisaged, but the contours of what we are seeing are exactly what has been planned for the last 2 years. Is India isolated in this? I think one has to look at this with a very clear prism without feeling bad or defeatist about it. The truth is India's voice in Afghanistan has constantly been a lone voice. At various times, people have empathized with us when it comes to our anger with what Pakistan's role in Afghanistan is. At various points, people have commended India for having the foresight to put these infrastructure projects in and to help Afghanistan in the way that India has over the last 20 years. And I'll just come to that. But in actual fact, India's voice has always been a lone voice. Those of you, I'm sure most of you will remember that in 2001, when the Indian delegation showed up in Bonn to discuss the future of Afghanistan, they found that a room had not been assigned for the Indian delegation at all. Ambassador Sati Lamba had led that delegation at the time, and India had to make space for itself at that hotel and then subsequently in the negotiations. In 2011, External Affairs Minister S.M. Krishna went to London. A conversation began on talks with the Taliban there, which India was once again left out of because it was felt that India would not go along with what the Western consensus on this was. So today, when we look at what has happened in the last few years, there is the Troika, which has US, Russia, China, talks with Pakistan about Afghanistan. And only in March this year, they actually revealed that they had had 6 meetings over the last 2 years. And what they negotiated, what they seem to have brought about is the current situation. The second, a kind of regional arc scenario that we have seen with Russia, China, Pakistan and Iran. These negotiations may not have been so much in everyone's eyes, but they are clear that today when these 4 countries and Qatar decide not to close their embassies in Kabul, decide not to leave, there is some amount of coordination going on, and these are now called the regional arc. India has chosen not to be part of this as well, or has not been included in. There are other formations around Afghanistan that have not had India's participation, basically because India's voice has been that you must have the Afghan voice in there. So India has not participated in any of these negotiations until Afghanistan's, whatever you might think of the elections, their democratically elected government actually is a part of those talks or is okay with these talks. So I think there is no question that India's voice is unique, it is possibly alone, it is possibly isolated, but it is no less important to be heard at a time like this. And that is why I find it particularly concerning that the government today has decided to stay as silent as it has. Why do I say that? Because we do hear a lot of noise about how India is going to bring out its own embassy and its own staff. Frankly speaking, every ambassador over here, every diplomat over here knows that India has carried out dozens of such evacuation processes without any song and dance about it. Okay, so we brought out our entire embassy, whether or not that was the right decision or the only decision we could have taken. The government has in addition said that they will bring out all the Hindus and Sikhs, these families that they're not actually families. Most of these are people working in Afghanistan. Their families have already moved here because of the kind of security scenario they face. And they hold long-term visas. So now they have been helped. External Affairs Minister Jaishankar gave a briefing to members of parliament today, and he has put the number of everyone who has been evacuated so far at 565. This is not a huge number, and it comes a day when the US is announcing evacuation of 82,900 already. So I don't think we should make a big deal about that. So where is it that I feel India has been silent? It is in its public pronouncements on the situation in Afghanistan. Whether it is the MEA's statement so far, whether it is the UN Security Council, where we have seen 2 statements by the UNSC on Afghanistan, and both of them, because India is the president of the UNSC this month, has been drafted by India, as well as External Affairs Minister's statement on threats to international peace. Also at the Human Rights Council yesterday, where the Indian representative spoke about India's view. In none of these statements has the word Taliban even been mentioned. In none of these statements has India actually acknowledged that there is some developments there that they are engaged with in any way. There's a certain amount of concern, there's a certain amount of, women's rights are good and violence is bad, sort of statements, but the silence of India over here is very, very telling. And I think that's one thing that everyone must, at least try to engage with. Why is the government in this situation of complete silence? Wait and watch, is that an alternative? Is that even an option at a time when things are changing so quickly in our neighborhood, in a way where we know that events will change India's security threat perceptions? It will change the way India has to decide where its resources go. And it will also add to an already burdened threat umbrella over India's northern flank, whether it is Pakistan's cross-border terrorism or the violence at the LOC, whether it is China's aggression at the line of actual control. And now we have possible threats coming from anti-India terror groups that will find ungoverned spaces or with the acquiescence of the Taliban, will be able to operate and plan attacks against India from Afghan soil. Is this a scenario that we can walk away from? My final point to you, Mr. Sinha said, does India really have stakes? And I would say that if this goes beyond just a question of goodwill, if you were just to take apart everything that India has done in the last 20 years, this was not some academic exercise done in a petri dish. Eventually, India was part of infrastructure development. It undertook projects that everyone thought was madness. They were perilous projects, building the parliament, building the Zaranj-Dilaram highway, building the Salma Dam, constructing Chabahar port and trying to build that up for transit trade to Afghanistan. That's one part of it. The second part of it, building Afghanistan's democracy. Whatever you think of those elections, we have had 4 of them or 3 of them, depending on what you count. Helping script the Afghan constitution, helping hold those elections, working with members of parliament and training a new generation of politicians. And then finally, in bringing Afghan students by the thousands to study in India, to allow them not just an education, training, skilling, also to be brought into the military academies in India. The fact that India was Afghanistan's first strategic partnership that Afghanistan signed, the fact that in many ways India has been more ambitious than other countries when it comes to what can be done with Afghanistan. It's not patronized Afghanistan as just one morass of warring, feuding groups that are eventually going to continue to carry out violent attacks on each other. The fact that India has chosen a better future for Afghanistan. I don't think these are things that we can just walk away from or say India has no stakes in. Are we going to today say that after this we just close our boundary and we don't deal with what is happening in Afghanistan? Most of the Indians are back. The Hindus and Sikhs that we have been worried about are back, and after this we just close it. What makes it particularly strange, this silence, and I will end over here, is the government complete silence for the last week on what it plans to do when it comes to the Afghans who wish to come to India, given the situation in Afghanistan. These Afghans include people who have been friends of India and are being targeted as a result of it. These include people who have trained in India in the military and are getting visits from the Taliban asking about their role in the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces. These are students who have either completed one term and need to come back for the next term to India, or their entire life, their education, their career hang in the balance. These are Indians who are married into Afghan families, who are not able to bring their family members over here. These are Indians who are Afghans who are interlinked with India at many different levels. And the answer of the government of India so far has been complete silence. They not only have not issued many e-visas that they had announced a week ago, they've actually cancelled any pre-issued visa on the pretext of security. So anyone who had got a pre-issued visa for India, who presumably was someone known to the embassy, someone who had contacts with India and a reason to be in India, today does not even have that hand of friendship that they thought that India had extended to them in return for their own friendship. So I think at this point I'd like to stop, and I'd like to simply say that whatever India's response is, silence, inaction is not a response.
Okay, now I turn to Dr. TCA Raghavan, who is one of the only historians which we have in foreign service. Now, before Raghavan, you really comment on Suhasini, think why we have remained so silent, whether silence is bliss or not. He has given a lot what we have done, and whether we have skipped the constitution, which I don't know how far Taliban will hold on to this constitution. Now, let me one or two lines about Raghavan. He didn't need any introduction. He is a former High Commissioner to Pakistan. He is a known Pakistan expert, but I requested him and rather persuaded him to come on board. He was a little reluctant to do so. He was DG of ICWA till recently. And he has written best-selling books. I still remember when his book Abdul Rahim Khan Khana was launched at Fountain area and IIC. There were more than 1,500 people. I have never seen such crowd for any book or any foreign service chapter really written. Then his second book on Pakistan, neighbors and multipurpose, all same thing. We had a huge. So Raghavan, I have again listed a few questions for you. I'm sure you have heard Suhasini, you have heard Shakti. You can really have your own say on whatever point you want to choose. Now, author Christian Fair says Taliban is a wholly owned subsidiary of Pakistani deep state. Pakistan has contributed significantly to Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan. Is an open secret. It has achieved the strategic depth it has been aspiring for decades. But some experts, like our friend Jens Prasad, feel that the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan will hurt Pakistan, as there is no love lost between Taliban leadership and the Pakistani army. Baradar who is tipped to be president of the Islamic Emirate if it comes into existence, was in Pakistani prison for 9 years. So will the Frankenstein which Pakistan had created will eventually strike back at her? Third, Barkhadat feels that India's main challenge is not Afghanistan. It is emboldened Pakistan that may seek to resume or resurrect pan-Islamic projects in Valley, as it may seek payback from the Taliban for support for the year. The Chief of Defense Staff General Rawat said only yesterday, we are ready. So how concerned should we be? Lastly, many believe without sanctioning Pakistan, Taliban can't be checked. But getting Pakistan sanctioned almost impossible. So how does India address Afghanistan, where it has support only at the level of people right now, and a Pakistan leadership which is seem to be bursting with excitement? Over to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm very happy to be part of this panel. So let me begin with the Pakistan part of the equation. Very clearly, Pakistan's immediate objectives have been realized and realized quite spectacularly. A large part of the gloating and the triumphalism is of course because India has been forced to close its embassy. But let's not forget that in Pakistan, at least for the past quarter century, and certainly for the past 2 decades, anti-Americanism has been as strong or perhaps even stronger than anti-India sentiment. So this was a double bonus for Pakistan. Not only is India excluded from Afghanistan, but you also see a humiliation of US and Western policy in Afghanistan. So much of the triumphalism and the gloating is informed by these two sentiments. I don't think it is more than what should have been expected in the circumstances, because one must understand that in Pakistan there was this great sense of grievance that they had been artificially excluded from the architecture constructed post 9/11, and they had never made any secret of the fact that this architecture was one that they wanted to change, and that they have succeeded in it realizes their immediate objectives, as I said. But in the medium and long term, there are a number of concerns, and I think the most pressing concern is, although it doesn't come out as clearly as does the concern about the blowback from the Taliban and from radical Islam in Pakistan itself, but I think the more immediate concern is about the displeasure of the United States and the West in general about the role of Pakistan in bringing about what is, at least in optical terms, a major humiliation for the Western alliance. So that is a position about which I think they are uncomfortable, and they certainly don't like the very close identification of Pakistan with the Taliban in Afghanistan, with the Taliban in the eyes of many Western observers, and they feel that this is an identification which is going to work against Pakistan in the medium and long term. So I think the Pakistan position is largely based on perceptions such as this. But I think we tend to sometimes underestimate how important a factor in Pakistani calculations the Indian presence in Afghanistan was. In many ways, if there was a red rag to the bull, it was the enhanced profile of India in Afghanistan, which spurred Pakistan to take many of the decisions it did, often at great risk to itself. And I think what they disliked most was the intimacy which the government there had with India, the access which our ambassadors had, and the fact that senior Afghan officials would be in India all the time. They saw the worst in the kind of close connection which they perceived between India and the NDS, and inevitably perhaps they blamed the TTP and the resistance and the difficulties they have placed in Balochistan to this intimacy which they saw between India and the NDS. So I think the India factor loomed larger than life in the Pakistani imagination. And to that extent, in the view of many Pakistanis, what they have undertaken in Afghanistan to restore the balance is a defensive kind of play, rather than having done something which is taking the offensive. I think what most Pakistanis feel is that a natural balance has been now restored in Afghanistan, and by bringing to an end the artificial architecture which had been constructed there earlier. I think we should keep this thing in mind while trying to understand Pakistan's position, because much of our discussion, for instance, in the debate which we have had in India and will continue to have about our position with regard to the Taliban, doesn't sufficiently take into account the Pakistani perception of India and Afghanistan. And in my view, and others can disagree, while there will be major areas of difference between the Taliban and Pakistan in the coming days, certainly they will not see eye to eye on many things. There will be all the frictions which follow neighborhood relationships. On one point, the Taliban and all factions of the Taliban will accommodate Pakistan would be on the India factor. So I think we should be too sanguine about the consequences or the results which could have been expected from our having a closer relationship with the Taliban at an earlier stage. It was, to my mind at least, while it is full of theoretical possibilities, in the near and medium term, it would not have led to any significant outcomes. Where do we go from here to answer your other points? I think what concerns me is, most of all, is the excessive securitization which has taken place with regard to how we view events in Afghanistan. And I think the latest example of that securitization was the fact that visas which have already been issued are now deemed to be cancelled. I don't think that was the way which we can approach Afghanistan in the future, because if we consciously lock ourselves out of Afghanistan because of perceived or because of real or imagined security considerations, I think the hand which we have, weak as it is, will become even weaker. I think as both Mr. Sinha and Ms. Haidar said, the goodwill which we have earned in Afghanistan is enormous. It is non-quantifiable, but it is enormous and it is palpable. And I think to keep that connection alive by being more relaxed on medical visas, on education visas, on uniting families, I think optically makes a huge difference. It's very difficult to explain this to a securitized mindset. But I see this problem specifically in Afghanistan, but I see it also as a reflection of the general securitization of our policy in South Asia as a whole. And I think it's only one facet of that or one aspect of that which we see in Afghanistan. And this excessive securitization leads to on our own locking ourselves out rather than any major factor leading to that locking out. My final point is about this Pakistan, Iran, China, Russia. I think it is too early to see this as a cemented or crystallized grouping or alliance. Much of it has been motivated by these countries' relationship with the United States. With the United States no longer in the frame, I think these positions are going to evolve and evolve a great deal. So I don't think we should make Afghanistan a litmus test for judging whether an alliance system is coming to our neighborhood. I think we should not make Afghanistan a litmus test in our dealings with China, just like we should not make Pakistan a litmus test in our dealings with China or indeed with Iran and Russia. With Iran in particular, the Chabahar port is an undertaking we should continue to work on, quite regardless of the larger diplomacy or the different roles which Iran may be playing in Afghanistan, because in the end, it's an infrastructure project which works to our advantage and to the advantage of Western and Northern Afghanistan, which is only part of our overall national interest. I think I've taken up my 10 minutes, so I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raghavan. You have given so many sort of thoughts for pondering over. I will turn to my friend Vivek Katju. Vivek is appearing on our IAFA function. Vivek, your audio, you can unmute your audio. Vivek, your audio is muted. Can you unmute it?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, he is appearing on our function for first time in 11 years. All others have appeared earlier. And I have a very long association considering a close friend. And there are so many unique things. He is the only Indian diplomat whom former President of Pakistan, General Musharraf, still remembers fondly. He has told the India Today conclave a few years back when he came in ITC Moria, saying, I had planned everything. One joint secretary called Vivek Katju foiled all my efforts. That is great credit. He will go down history. Second is that he has been very consistent. We are all talking about America's failure in Afghanistan. More than 6 years back, a delegation of think tanks came to India and there was discussion in FICCI. I was also present there. And Vivek told 6 years back, Afghanistan represents the biggest foreign policy failure of the USA. And the delegation came from USA was totally sort of shocked, but he said what he felt. And recently, I think more than 3 months, all television channels he have been openly saying India should talk to Taliban. So he has been consistent in his views, and I'm very glad that he is here. Vivek, I have so many questions thrown at you, and you can choose whatever you want. Your last word means you are free to comment on all those you have spoken before you. The first is that USA has, whatever word euphemism, is capitulated to the Taliban and is exiting in humiliating manner, leaving behind Afghanistan in the hands of a regime which is an antithesis of democracy and human rights. Do you agree with experts who think that dismantling of the US as a superpower has begun? Won't terrorist groups feel emboldened? And won't American rhetoric about democracy and human rights will be questioned by many? In what people have already commented, game plan of China and Russia. Now, Swapandas Gupta, the nominated member of parliament, he said, with Taliban in Afghanistan, the western frontier of Pakistan have moved from Durand line to the border of Iran. And lastly, as I request all of you, what are the major challenges for India and what are options? Over to you, Vivek.
Thank you, Surendra. And I very carefully heard all my co-panelists. Thank you for inviting me here. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. Yes, you are right. Over the last many years, I've been advocating that we should open up with the Taliban. And consistently, we've not done so. I'm sure we are very wise people who manage our foreign and security policies. They must have had good reasons. But I'm finding now there is some kind of a justification being offered. And my friend Raghavan will forgive me that this is a justification for not talking, this kind of assumption that there is a coincidence of interests between the Taliban and Pakistan when it comes to India. My own little knowledge of the Afghan, and I've had some experience of interacting with them, which stretches back to a quarter of a century, indicates to me that they have a very shrewd sense of their own interests. And even though they may be totally dependent on a foreign power, they always find space to look at their interests. And I do think that the whole purpose of an engagement, which I was advocating in an open engagement, was to explore if there was some ground which could be created between us and the Taliban, some space where we could have seen, notwithstanding the close connections with their close connections with Pakistan. But I think that here in Delhi, there seemed to be a complete lack of anticipation of the way things turned in Afghanistan. I was a little surprised today when I read that the CDS, General Rawat, told a think tank yesterday that we had anticipated that the Taliban will take over Kabul. Now, I know that the good general is somewhat loquacious. But if this was the general's perspicacity that he knew this, I would imagine he would have infused the Indian system with this profound insight. Then the question is, what did the Indian system do? Waited and watched? Because that's the buzzword today. And I find that there are certain buzzwords which have come into our diplomatic vocabulary, which are being used by our strategic and foreign policy thinkers. Strategic patience. I hear it on and on. Strategic patience. The second is we should not give the Taliban legitimacy. I don't know if my friend Raghavan would agree with me, but in diplomacy, don't understand the term legitimacy. I understand the term diplomatic recognition. And Surendra, you are our senior. You too. I mean, we've never been asked to legitimize a government. A legitimacy is a function of a state and its people. It's the international community either recognizes a government or it doesn't. And I know that it's fudged now by saying we recognize states and all the rest, but the word legitimacy is the new buzzword too. And similarly, there's this buzzword wait and watch. Now, good, we should wait and watch because the present situation, at least for the week next day, or next week or 10 days, you can't do anything. But wait and watch till when? No one seems to be clear in their mind about wait and watch till then. The next is inclusive government. Of course, there should be an inclusive government. And I think the Pakistanis too would like some kind of an inclusive government because if there is no inclusive government, there is a danger that the Americans and the West would turn off the tap of assistance. And as it is, there's been a halt to World Bank assistance and the assistance from other international agencies and national governments. And if the present state of the Afghan economy, which will contract in any case, collapse, but if that gets much worse and it collapses, then I think the Pakistani fears of of lakhs of refugees turning up, which they won't be able to prevent, notwithstanding the fencing of the Durand, would really be realized. So we've got to really look at these things, and I have been somewhat concerned that till even as late as last month, on July 29th, the External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, told Parliament, and I'm reading out what he told. He says, India, please mark the words, India would never accept an outcome which is decided by force. I wrote in one of my pieces, I have little else to do, I know, so I write pieces for the press. I wrote that never is a slogan, it's not policy. So I don't know why we adopted these slogans, we will never accept this and we will never. Today, you have to accept that there is a changed reality in Kabul, and how do you deal with this changed reality? Now you can retreat into sullenness and sit in a corner and twiddle your diplomatic thumbs. Or you better engage the Taliban. Now, engagement doesn't mean endorsement. It doesn't even mean that you've got to blindly and rush into recognizing them. But certainly, an engagement to explore opportunities, even if the opportunities don't arise, is, I think, required. Next, I think an engagement will also provide us an opportunity to convey our red lines to the Taliban. And at least till now, some Taliban representatives, one doesn't know how influential they are, because quite clearly, much about the Taliban boys is still unknown. But some have been conveying, and I think conveying to us, as they began conveying to us almost 4.5 years back, that please, they said, please don't treat us as Pakistan proxies. And I think Raghavan knows that more than anyone else, that they conveyed it to us. And what surprised me is that we didn't proceed further with exploring what they say. Why did we take it for granted that what they are saying simply is not tenable? The purpose of diplomacy, as I've learned, is to pursue opportunities. Was it the fear that gun?
I think something wrong with the audio. Vivek, your audio is not working. Can you stop and switch on again? Vivek, can you hear me? Vivek, can you hear me? I think something wrong, some connection gone wrong.
He's gone off now. He's off. He may be joining back.
No, I think his connection is gone off. Vivek, are you there?
If you wait for a minute, it will come back.
Yeah. Since we don't have time to invite the panelists again to comment, I'm sure some of you might be wishing to comment on what Vivek is saying. But I think we will move on, and we are honored to have the former Chief of Army Staff General Deepak Kapoor with us. So as soon as Vivek finishes, I will invite him to say a few words about the military side of the military capabilities of Taliban. I mean, they have captured the whole country, but basically they have not faced any sort of a real battle anywhere. They just walked in. So how all these weapons, they have bought weapons, some from Americans, some from the Defense Force of Afghanistan, which they left, whether they can use them and how really competent they are. Vivek, can you come? I think General, in the meantime, can you just 2 minutes, please, can you share your views? General Kapoor.
Sorry, I lost. Sorry, I lost my Wi-Fi.
Okay, come on, Vivek. Okay, General, I will invite you the moment Vivek finishes. Okay, Vivek, go ahead.
No, I really have very little else to say but the last point that I'll make is that I am seeing that the Chinese are bound to play for Afghanistan. They have not shown, they've not hidden their desire to integrate, quote unquote, integrate the Western neighborhood consisting of Pakistan, Iran, the Central Asian states, with their own Western regions, and they move aggressively on this. Pakistan is in their pocket. Iran, they've made a big play. The Central Asian states, even though they are contested, they are there economically. And Afghanistan is a missing link. No, I don't see this, say that this will happen immediately. But if we are reluctant to engage the Taliban and allow time for the Pakistanis and to consolidate further, and the Chinese to tell the Taliban that they are their friends, quote unquote, that they think they are not bothered about what the international community would say, but they are there for the long run, then I fear that we will have big difficulties in our entire Western neighborhood in terms of our economic interests, our security interests, and of course, our connectivity problems, which are already immense because of Pakistan. The bypass that we tried to create via Chabahar and Zaranj Dilaram will also close. That's all that I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivek, for giving your insight in this. And I'm sure some others would like to comment, but we don't have comment. I will now invite General Kapoor. Kindly share your views about the military capabilities of Taliban.
Thank you, Ambassador Kumar. I would say that in Afghanistan today, it is easy to be an insurgent terrorist force than a regular conventional fighting force. Most Taliban victories that have come about recently are attributable to two factors. Firstly, rampant corruption within the government led by President Ghani, and secondly, secret deals behind closed doors which have taken place to avoid fighting. While a huge amount of military hardware has fallen into the Taliban's lap with the disintegration of the Afghan National Security Forces and abandonment of weaponry by the US and NATO forces, it does not overnight make Taliban a strong conventional fighting force. In sum, on date, Taliban remains a ragtag collection of varied tribal insurgents. And as far as threat to J&K and India is concerned, having tackled insurgency for the last 32 years in J&K, I can say with quite an emphasis that we are capable of dealing with the Taliban, stroke Al-Qaeda, stroke IS, should they decide to do something in Jammu and Kashmir. And when I say this, you must remember the Taliban in its earlier avatar from 1996 to 2001 and ask ourselves this question as to what were they able to achieve at that point in time. And today, when the conditions in J&K are much more stable compared to that period, I have no doubt that from a security perspective, something which Suhasini Haidar was worried about, I think we can quite take care of any attempts at disruption and turbulence in the state of Jammu and Kashmir.
Thank you, General. Thank you very much for giving this perspective. Now, I see among the attendees, we have the senior most Indian diplomat, Ambassador Eric Gonsalves. Are you there, sir? Ambassador Gonsalves. Ambassador Gonsalves, sir. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, Surendra, but I am a novice in this area. I know nothing. Look west. I've always looked east. So I refrain from taking things with all these experts.
But you have heard all of them with your 60, 70 years experience. What is your general impression?
No, I think I agree actually with all the speakers who say that we should be more active in looking at the situation as it is on the ground today and not going on with this, Afghan hands and Afghan this and Afghan that, which is a mantra which doesn't make any meaning. The Taliban is there, we have to deal with them. The Pakistanis are there, and we have to deal with them. And frankly, as Vivek has said, I think the Chinese are the thing that we should be worried about most of all, because they have immense pockets, they have immense patience, and they have great resources. So I think we are in a difficult situation. But I think that the Suhasini's point that there is an undercurrent of strong support for India among the ordinary Afghans because of what we have done. This is something we are very foolish to throw away with by doing what we're doing about visas and so on. So I think we have to tell the government to look at things a little more in depth. Thank you.
Okay. Shakti ji would like to comment on what Vivek was saying.
I would love to take 30 seconds. No, Vivek, I agree with. So, Hasni, I just wanted to, since I was very strict on the 10 minutes, of course, India has stakes. I'm not saying that. I'm merely saying we should not see it as the end of the world. The kind of panic reaction I'm seeing in the media, we've lost everything is gone. What is this? Let's take a sober view. Of course, it is a challenge to India, but there are options available. And I completely, in fact, agreed with Vivek completely, should engage with the Taliban. Don't hand over Afghanistan to Pakistan or to China on a platter. You do have a chance. You should engage. You may not get the things you want to get immediately, but if you don't even start doing so, how will you ever protect that side? That is the limited point I wanted to make. It is a difficult situation. We understand it. China is there, absolutely, but it's not game over.
Former Home Secretary Padmanabhan sir from Hyderabad, do you want to say something? Padmanabhan sir, you can unmute your audio. Yes.
Yeah, the only comment I have is an excellent presentation by every one of them. But I don't see any common ground between the four speakers, not even a single.
That's the diversity of India.
No, I know, but there's no common thread anywhere. My point is, what happened in the past, why we did not befriend or at least engage with the Taliban and all that is past. Let's not discuss about that. I think the questions before you are going to be, the question would soon arise about recognition of the government, the Taliban government. The international community is divided. Canada has said they would not recognize, I read somewhere in the papers. And of course, Russia and China seem to be very anxious to do that. So what would be the India's stand? I mean, are you going to recognize? Because the point is you want an inclusive government there. I mean, they may not. I mean, they may be, for the namesake, they might have some sort of small parties, which are not relevant. But essentially, it would be a Taliban-led government, completely Taliban-controlled government. So is India going to recognize them? Without recognition, where is the question of engagement? How do we engage with them? Now, these are questions. Now, I have another question also arising from the generals, this one. As handling Kashmir, I remember the amount of, Stinger missiles which were given by Americans to the Mujahideen to fight against the Russians were used in Kashmir. I mean, the battle-hardened, Mujahideen supported the Pakistani elements. They have used it. Now, there is a huge amount of armaments which are left behind. We saw photographs where these fellows are taking with the aircraft also and all that. Now, who is going to control and how are you going to check the misuse of this? which is in their hands. He said it is a ragtag army, but the ragtag army, people surrendered. I mean, the 3 lakh force of Afghanistan had surrendered and they ran away. Nobody had put up a fight at all. I mean, these are some of the questions, I have in my mind. And well, that is it.
Okay, thank you, sir. Now, Suresh, I can see your hand. Suresh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, sir, Ambassador Surendra Kumar, and thank you, everyone. I was a bit late in coming through, but I think I got the drift of what might have been discussed. Frankly speaking, I'm voicing a bit of a concern from my side that even though we perhaps had an idea that the situation in Afghanistan is going to get unstable, even if we didn't anticipate that Taliban would be really so quick in getting control of Kabul. And I still cannot fathom as to why and how it happened. Surely the Afghan forces must have had some wherewithal to be able to stand up to the Taliban. But anyway, that is for what really I'm very concerned about is that we do not seem to have any kind of a strategy to be dealing with Taliban or to deal with Afghanistan. We keep on saying mantras, inclusive, this and that, and wait and watch, and etc. Evacuation is the first priority. All that is true. But eventually, once we know the Taliban has formed the government, and if we know that other governments, we know that there are some who will recognize them immediately. What are we going to do then? Are we going to recognize Taliban government at all or not? Even if it is not respecting the women's right, who are we going to deal with? I mean, I'm only saying it that we seem to be really struggling out. And just one more thing. Just one thing. We talk about evacuation of Afghans and who are in need. Today in the paper, I'm reading the story of an Afghan MP who landed at the airport and who was deported back. Why? And there seems to be no explanation as to what we are doing. What about the Afghan students and the military personnel who are here? No thought at all. So I think we need to sit down and not we, the government, has to have a proper policy.
Well, Suresh, look, nobody from government is here. So it's not fair that we are not doing. They must be talking. They must be concerned. How do we know? We don't know. Everything is not known to us. But we have one friend of ours who has formally joined the BJP. I'm talking about my own friend from Allahabad University times, Sanjeev Tripathi, who headed the intelligence of India at one time. Sanjeev, come on and enlighten. So many things have been said. The government are not doing this, government are not doing this. You should have done this. Now at least you can defend the government. Sanjeev. Yeah, you have to unmute your audio.
Thank you, Surendra. Actually, I'm not going to defend anybody, or I don't represent the government or the party here. It was a very enlightening, webinar discussion, and where panelists have given their thoughts, and they have put up their views in a very cogent manner. But I personally feel that what Vivek has said, that engagement, again, the thing is that, in my view, all the important groups which operate in the region, we must have a line of communication open with them. It may be a covert line of communication, because we never know when we need to establish contact with them. So whether we had any line open with Taliban or not, I don't know. I retired about it 9 years back. So whether it is there or not, government knows it better. But yes, engagement is required. We can't just keep on sitting. And once the Taliban government is there, various countries start recognizing that government, we have to start some engagement and have some, express our concerns to them, and then decide about it. We just can't just keep on sitting and watching. That is what my personal view is. Thank you.
Okay, some of my friends have been reluctant to say anything, but I have friends who is never reluctant to say and have her voice. I can't have gender discrimination. We have one member on the panel. So now I invite Neelam Sabarwal. Come on, Neelam.
Yeah.
Yes, shoot your question or comments.
Okay. Can I be heard?
Yes, yes.
Can I be heard, Surinder?
Yeah, loudly.
All right. Okay, there's never ever any early warning, but I should say one thing. Of course, a most interesting discussion. No time to sum it up, but some points really need to be emphasized. Raghavan's point about this excessive securitization, I think, of Afghanistan policy, our policy to Afghanistan will lose whatever residual goodwill or the goodwill that we had generated over the years. And likewise, I think the points made by Suhasini, let's not overdo evacuating 565 people, I think, and let's not try and inject into all this our CAA that now it's coming to play because we will only give, refuge to certain denominations, and then, as Suresh said, make the Afghan MPs and others go to Istanbul. Now, to come to the other point, I'm sorry I'd missed Mr. Shakti Sinha's presentation, but of course I take his general point that all right, we need not all is lost. Let's in that sense little bit wait and watch. Coming to Vivek's consistent point about engagement, Vivek, a dear friend, and I really respect his views, and it's based on solid first-hand experience and reflection. But Vivek, just as you said that Jaishankar, by saying that we will never do this and never do that, so unrelated to what's happening on the ground, let us not make engagement also one of those slogans. Bhai, up now at this time that you are talking also Taliban as one big monolith. It is not. There are so many factions, sub-factions. Then you have the Haqqani network. You talk today to one person, you say that, okay, somebody promised you security for your embassy. The other factions go and just, bomb you out. So what is it really? We need to also understand, number one, now that, now that the sort of the battle is lost, I think we should go little more pragmatically on this or qualify engagement. You've given me the chance. Now you'll have to give me a few more seconds, I think. So in that sense, we will have to evaluate. Of course, we know what China is doing, and they are fully in the deal. Perhaps I think they may just because they would like economic engagement and stability, perhaps some element of terror may get, it may be a little more stable. But the main point being that now engagement, we'll have to think it through. And in that sense, the connected point comes the legitimacy. Now we don't have to rush and suddenly abandon all the principles that we have stood by and go ahead. We should talk to them, engage with them, and try and secure our interests.
Okay.
That would be the point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'm left with the only 3-4 minutes. I will go back to each panelist in 1 minute. Do you think in next 6 months or 1 year, in spite of everything what Taliban might have done, most of the world countries, most of the world will recognize them, accept them, and start doing business with them? Starting with Suhasini, 1 minute only.
Sorry, yes. I missed the last bit. The question is,
do you think in 6 months or 1 year, most of the world will start doing business with the Taliban? That has been the practice past.
Mute now.
Sorry, I heard what you think we should do in the next.
Do you think the most of the world will start recognizing Taliban once they are in control? Whatever they will record, whatever will be the sort of their treatment of B-men or the other Afghan citizens? 1 minute.
I do think that a lot will be seen in the next month, and that is because we get into the September month at the United Nations. The first question will be the General Assembly's Accreditation Committee. Who is going to represent Afghanistan at the UN will be very important. Will they continue with the current ambassador, Ghulam Pichaksai, or is there going to be some kind of Taliban representation? We know that in 1996, the OIC had requested that the Taliban should be heard as well at the UN, and that was not accepted, and they continued with Ambassador Ravan Farhadi at the time.
Okay.
So that's the UN. The second part will be the sanctions committee at the UN and what they do with Taliban leadership. And the third question is really going to be, as far as the United Nations goes, you know, the UN Secretary General has just said that the UNSC's biggest leverage with the Taliban today is its desire for recognition, its desire for legitimacy. So I can only hope that the international community, not just India, tries to ensure that those guarantees come from the Taliban before they give them that leverage.
Okay, Shakti ji, what's your view?
One, of course, we don't even know that there's a government. As of now, we are talking about Taliban government. There isn't a Taliban government as yet. Now, I completely agree with Suhasini. Basically, Taliban needs the world because out of money. They won't have any money for the fighters. They won't have any money to maintain roads. It's a young country. I think there is an opportunity for the world. If Taliban wants to engage with the world 6 months' time, please engage properly and get the leverage that you actually have over them. Don't underestimate yourself.
Okay, Raghavan.
I don't see a rush to engage the Taliban internationally. I think it will be a very, very slow process in terms of diplomatic recognition. I see it as coming at the end of a process rather than at the beginning. So I don't think we'll have a situation where the whole world is recognized and we are the only ones who are wondering what to do.
Okay, Vivek, the last word. Vivek, unmute your audio.
I agree with Raghavan that the West will go slow on diplomatic recognition because that today is the only pressure point that they have. That, and in addition, stopping financial flows. And I do feel that both these points would be in our interest. Second, I see Pakistan trying to form a kind of government that will be acceptable to the international community. Third, I'm not quite sure what the Russians and the Chinese would do. The Iranians might hold their hand, but the Russians and the Chinese, I'm a little concerned about. Will they go slow or will they try to hasten this process of diplomatic recognition of the Taliban? And the last point, engagement for me is not a slogan. Engagement is a process. You engage all factions. If there are factions, you engage everyone. It is not one. It is not either or. That is what I mean. It's a process. It's a difficult process. You go ahead, you run into blind alleys, some you find openings, you move ahead. But the point is, even if you don't, and this has to be open because everyone else has done it open. But if you don't even engage in this process, then where do you end? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you all the panelists who have done a brilliant job. And I think our program is not anyway less engaging than what you see 9 o'clock prime time. And thank you all those who cared to attend a function. I'm glad to see KP Singh from Gianja Hostel, Allahabad University after 50 years. And I have seen so many other friends, our friend Mahen Kumar always attends, and Kumavatji, thank you, and Padmayaji, thank you. And thank you very, and a round of applause to all of you who have attended.
Thank
Good night.
You. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.